calling me day before yesterday, so we didn't get a recording. Any questions or comments? This is our final class, and I approach that with mixed emotions. I know we're happy to have another milestone behind us, but it's also kind of, I'll miss you guys. Uh, any questions or comments about anything before we move on? Some of you talked to me about extra time. Don't mind you taking through Sunday night for extra time. I know the class ends technically tonight, but I can give you the extra time. Just be sure that you get in by 12 o'clock on Sunday night. I'll start grading things, and so you'll see if you have something that's not in, there may be a 0 there as a placeholder, but be sure that you send me a notice that you've turned it in. Go back and look at weeks 1 and 2. I have weeks 1 and 2 done, and I left you a video comment on the homework this morning, so you can check those. But I should have everything in for week 1 and 2. If you don't see a grade, then let me know about that. There is some problem with 5 and 6 discussion boards not showing up in the grading list, so I'll deal with that and put that into your manual thing that I send over to the grader. Anybody have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question for discussion 6. We wasn't able to do it. Like, I see where you said as far as the bugs was fixed in the Moodle. We were able to do it for discussion 5, but discussion 6, we had to reply underneath you. I just wanted to make sure that's cool.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Anyway you can get it to me at this stage, I count it. So that's good. I don't know what's wrong with Moodle, and I'm about giving up. So it's probably something I've turned on or turned off, or don't know to turn it on or whatever. I've looked back through that thing and compared it to the others, and the others it's set up the exact same way, but it just doesn't work there. I sent Nick a message this morning. He might be able to fix it, but wherever you get, I look very carefully at emails and posting under mine, all those things, just to be sure I get all your stuff, because I want you to get every point that you can get. I think most of you are in really good shape. I hope it doesn't hurt your feelings that you're doing well. I think most of you are good students. One thing I do encourage you to do, and I mentioned that in the video this morning, if you haven't done the Grammarly.com, download that to your computer, because that is a great tool for your toolkit. It checks spelling and punctuation and syntax of your sentences, and then go back and check them and fix them. And the more you fix them, the more you realize we all have particular issues in our writing that we do over and over. I mean, some of us, it's like run-on sentences and not putting punctuation in, just run a sentence all the way for the whole paragraph with no punctuation, and that's a huge fix you need to get used to fixing. So every one of us have a different English teacher background. And I've got English teachers that were just absolutely superb, and some that were horrible. And even though I write books, I still have these checks to be sure that I do it correctly. So let me encourage you to do that as well. Add that to your toolkit, put it on your computer. It even corrects your emails. So everything that comes out of your hand, you want it to be professional, and you want it to look well, because those things drive how other people perceive you. So let me encourage you to work on that as part of your professionalism. And so I think that will be helpful to you. And keep my number. I mean, if you just need to talk to somebody or ask questions, I don't have all the answers, but I'm an expert in going to school. I've been in school all my life. So maybe I can encourage you. If you get discouraged, you're going to quit, you need to call me, and let's have a conversation. We can't afford to quit. We can't afford not to go on, because I'm telling you, as we've seen with all the things about ethics, education is a major piece for improvement for the future. We've talked about your family and your kids and your goals, but if we're going to move this country forward, it's going to be because education helped us get there. And so I want to encourage you to go as far as you can go while you're going, and do well, and you'll be blessed for it. So And I hope you don't mind if I add you guys to my prayer list and keep you in my mind and my heart and pray for you and pray for your family and your kids and all those things while you're doing this, because uh, going to school is hard work and it's stressful, like we don't have any other stress going on in our lives. We certainly have enough to handle without, trying to do it on our own. So any questions, comments, and we'll finish our discussion today. Okay, if not, yesterday I enjoyed the discussion on crime and punishment, and well, I say enjoyed. I don't know if I enjoyed it or not, but it was a good discussion. Brought a lot of things to light that we need to think about in this country from ethics standpoint of how we treat people and whether crime and punishment is equitable, whether it's fair. It's always a human element involved. There's always going to be problems when humans are involved because we are kind of broken individuals as a species, I think, and we don't treat our own kind very well. And I think that is a huge deal in how we treat each other. Um, and it just seems to be that these things continue to come up and continue to be inequitable and all this stuff. I want to just mention chapter 17. I'm not going to dwell here. We're going to go on to 18, but animal ethics is another area that some people feel very strongly about. I don't know what your particular feelings are. How many of you have pets? Anybody? Other than children. I mean, children aren't pets, but
I have 2 cats.
what do you have? Cats, dogs, snakes?
I have 2 cats, 2
Oh,
boy cats.
okay. Nobody has snakes, I hope. I don't like snakes. Anybody else? No other pets? Pets do become, I guess, part of the family. But I think most of the ethical issues that we would have around animals would be people that just shoot animals for the sake of killing an animal. I mean, we see this in Africa all the time with killing elephants to get their ivory from their tusk and just leaving the animals there to rot because they're not used for food usually. But to kill such a beautiful animal like that is a crime. It ought to be a crime. We actually did that in American history in the West in killing the buffalo as a means of starving out the Native Americans and taking away their food sources. Men would ride trains and shoot them from the windows of the train and just slaughter them and leave them laying there to rot. And that would have been that's a very unethical way to treat any animal. I don't think if you're going to have pets, you ought to take care of them and feed them and keep them clean and those kind of things. That's an ethical thing. But there are people that take this issue with any of these issues that we talk about. You always have an extreme right and extreme left. People that are very, very too liberal and people that are too conservative. I think, again, this is one of those things that you find the middle way. In Buddhism, it's really interesting that anything that has life to it is considered to be sacred. It could be a bug for that matter. If you remember the old Karate Kid movie, in that movie, they got really upset with him for killing a cockroach with his shoe because the cockroach had sentient life about it and was considered to be, since it's a life form, it needed to be respected and taken care of. So we have some real problems with animals and how we treat them and how we use them, and I think that's something that we ought to be thinking about. Any vegetarians in the group as far as eating meat? Some people feel very strongly about not eating animals. You realize that genetically we have lots of similarities, and so that is an issue. Most people aren't strictly vegetarian, but and there are a lot of other issues. One of the issues that I found to be most interesting was chickens. that they have developed a blind chicken that can't see, so that it can survive along with other chickens without pecking them or fighting against them. And so it was a way of controlling animals pecking each other or whatever. Can you imagine that you would develop a whole race of blind chickens just to keep them complacent and, bearing eggs and producing meat and all this other stuff? But that is one of the things that there is raised in the ethical thing, using animals for experiments as a means of not having to experiment on humans is another ethical issue. We're seeing that right now in the COVID virus testing, vaccine testing. It will go through an animal phase, of course, and then before it ever gets to human trials, and it takes a long time. Then there's the issue of endangered species, and so many of a lot of our species on the planet are disappearing. Elephants are fairly endangered. Tigers, some animals have disappeared because they have been overhunted or overkilled. Things like buffalo have come back because people have taken in hand the preservation of those animals, so that you have more buffalo now probably out west than you would think. Ted Turner, actually, that owns the big TVN in Atlanta, owns more property than any person in America. He owns almost the whole state of Wyoming, but he raises buffalo and crosses them with cattle to produce a beefalo, which he sells in his restaurants across the country. But apparently he uses some pretty ethical ways to raise those animals. So animal rights is a big deal. It can be groups that are, as I said, extremely violent, and they fight against all kinds of things. Protest things like cosmetic companies that use animal products to make cosmetics. That's one of the big things that we've seen in the past, and that's been interesting. There is a chart on page 472 of your book that has some animal rights, animal welfare things that you might want to look at. Any comments on animal issues before we move forward? You guys still with me?
Yeah, we here.
Yeah.
We're here. Okay, just not as interesting as Crime and Punishment, is it? So, anyways, I wanted to touch on chapter 18 because it is biotechnology and bioengineering, which is something that probably as healthcare workers you're going to come in contact with probably several times in your life. But there's a lot of issues in biotechnology, bioengineering that are ethical issues. One of the issues includes things like athletic enhancements or cognitive enhancements, where that is done artificially. The most common would be athletes taking steroids to be stronger or to beef up their bodies to gain the advantage. Like in the Olympics, they will drug test in order to try to rule out people that are taking steroids and things to beat everybody else in the games. You'll probably find a lot of that, and you may come from communities where one of the few ways that young men especially have of getting out of the community is sports, right? They want to get into college, they want to play ball, they want to get in the NBA or whatever, and what they do to try to gain the advantage of that is an ethical issue. Is it ethically correct to, for coaches to give these guys, steroids and trying to, to make a better, to make a better player? Anybody have any thoughts on that or issues or had any experience with it? And they also do the same thing with cognitive enhancement, trying to enlarge your brain abilities. Another thing you hear a lot about are stem cell research, trying to solve diseases through experimenting with stem cells. Does everybody know what stem cells are? You probably have heard that before. Stem cells are basically cells that haven't been turned on or off to produce a certain job in the body. There's a point in the development of a fetus in which cells begin to specialize, and they'll become like a cell for the eye, a cell for the heart, whatever. But you have a lot of those kind of cells in the afterbirth when a baby is born. In the placenta, you'll have a lot of those kind of cells that are and they're very important cells. It's a very important way to learn, but they do experiment with trying to get those cells. Say you have MS or you have some other kind of a disease. There's a lot of research being done with, can those cells be turned on to be brain cells that will replace the ones that are problematic as far as things having MS, and whether that is ethical or not. I remember, you guys probably don't, but I remember when Christian Bernard made the first heart transplant. Anybody have any idea where that heart transplant was done, the first one? You might be surprised.
Tell us.
South Africa. You know, some of the most backward countries in the world will surprise you. The Asian Heart Institute in Asia is actually in the Philippines, and they do some very forward-reaching stuff. Well, I think it was 70. I want to say it's 76 when he did that first heart transplant. And the now it's common. It's common. We don't even know people walking around with heart transplants. Heart transplants are not a very long-term answer to a problem. I mean, they last about 10 years. Then they went to a mechanical heart with Barney Miller in Utah, and he lived about 6 weeks on an artificial heart. Now they have perfected that to where they can where they're able to have an outside pump. I mean, keep people alive basically until a heart becomes available. But there was a big ethical issue with that. Why do you think, especially religious people, why do you think they might have a problem with a heart transplant?
Because of somebody else's, because isn't they taking another person's organ or body parts is like a thing that's wrong to do.
Well, we talked about, I think it's the Adventists who don't do blood transfusions, but the Christians put so much emphasis on the heart being the center of your Christianity. They talk about your heart being changed and all this stuff. That is a misnomer, because the word in the Greek is cardia, and it is a section of your brain. It is not that muscle in your chest. So there's nothing really, sacred about the human heart. But that was the argument. Well, what happens to a Christian if you take his heart out and put some murderer's heart in him? Does he take on the personality of the murderer, right? That was a battle. That was a huge battle in those days. But now we face a whole different battle. I mean, heart transplants, as I said, are very common now. The Russians actually tried a brain transplant. That didn't go well. I don't think they've been able to perfect that very much. But out of the stem cell idea came the cloning idea. What is a clone?
Isn't it a person that's artificially made from a person's DNA or animal's DNA?
Yeah, just one cell. You realize that every one of your cells in your body, from your skin to your fingernails to whatever, all have your genetic code in them, right? When they do DNA testing at a murder scene or whatever, it's like genetic fingerprints, right?
Hmm.
You could technically take, in cloning, could take one skin cell and could replicate that cell, and it has to, of course, specialize in all this stuff, but the organism that's made from it will be an identical match to the person it was made from. I mean,
Yeah, and cloning is real, right? Cloning is
they
something
have done it
that
with animals. Yeah, Dolly, the sheep in Edinburgh, was the first one to ever successfully be cloned. And interestingly enough, Dolly had normal offspring that came about normally through, reproduction, and those offspring were normal, so there weren't any kind of defects or whatever. The one thing that Dolly had that was different was she seemed to be susceptible to lung infections, and they weren't
mm,
sure whether that was caused from the cloning process or something that was missed, or it was just a normal issue with the sheep, themselves, where they were kept and where they lived. But she lived a fairly normal life. Uh, and there's a lot of stuff out there. If you want to go look at this, go to YouTube and look up the cloning of Dolly the sheep. Now, since then, what's really interesting is they have cloned other animals. Uh, the book talks about that they've cloned cows and sheep and goats and mice
chickens.
and pigs and rabbits, even a cat named CC for carbon copy or copycat. Uh,
Mm,
and there was a company in California that was open that mainly catered to wealthy people who had pets and they wanted to keep a clone of their pets, and so they made a lot of money doing that. But it was a very tedious process. There's not really a great deal of money in it. South Korea, a few years ago, claims to have cloned the first human being, and we haven't heard anything else from that. So we don't know if that was fake news or what. But could you imagine having a clone of yourself? Would you want one?
mm. I don't know.
It'd be nice sometimes to have an extra pair of hands, right? But we see all these science fiction
I
movies that
would
kind of
wonder
freak us out.
about the.
I'm
I would
sorry.
wonder about. I said I think I would wonder about the mental capacity of that clone.
Oh yeah.
Like is it very um how can I explain it? Like, is it like me? Like, does it think like an actual human like myself, or is it one of those where it's kind of easily guided or follow upon direction? Like, oh, go kill America, and then they go
Hmm.
and like, you know what I mean? Like, this weird. That's what I wonder. How is the mental capacity?
Well, and
If they
that's a
get.
part of the ethical considerations. If you clone an army of 1 million people, are you able to influence them just to kill, become killing machines, or are they? Is there a human element in there? And I guess a lot of this goes back to that discussion we had at the beginning about what you believe about life in general, whether we evolved or whether there's anything special about a human being over an animal or anything else. So I think there's where the religious discussion comes in. I think probably religious people would be much more anti-cloning, anti-stem cell. Remember the Reagans got into trouble when President Reagan had Alzheimer's, and Nancy Reagan came out in favor of stem cells because they were working on possible cures for Alzheimer's, and all the Christians were up in the air about her comments about that. But those are personal things that you would never know a clone. I mean, if you had a clone come into the emergency room or your doctor's office where you're working, there'd be no way you'd ever detect a clone from anybody else. So that's one of those areas we probably don't know everything that's going on in it, but it's kind of scary to think about. Um, there's also a lot of genetically modified organisms, like we talked about with the blind chickens, uh, that you modify them to where whatever their weaknesses are, you're able to play those down. They do a lot of this even now with children, because before they're born, they're able to look into the womb and see possible defects or check the child's DNA for, mutations. And some of those they're even able to treat before while the baby's being formed. Anybody had any experience with that or comment on that? Uh, I mean, having a baby now is a much more technical issue than it ever was. Used to, you didn't even know the baby's sex before the baby was born. Now you know so much more about it than you did before. But there's a lot of medical conditions that can be uh, headed off because of this genetic testing and different things. I mean, they check everything now. That's one of the reasons why that they encourage mothers to go to the doctor early and you know uh, to be able to be sure that there's not something wrong that they could fix beforehand. So genetics is a whole field that we could discuss about this. There's a lot of controversial history in the eugenics movement. What do you think is meant by eugenics? Any takers? How much do
Where
you know
you at?
about? I'm sorry.
I said, Darnell, where you at?
There's nobody helping me this morning. Y'all making me struggle on my last day. Uh, how many of you know anything about what Adolf Hitler was doing in the concentration camps besides killing 6 million Jews? He was trying to form a master race. And what did he consider to be the master race? There's a lot of stuff he wasn't, right? Blonde, blue-headed Aryans. He wanted to repopulate the earth with blonde-headed white people. And so what they did was they used Jews who were twins, and they would inject them with things. And so you had a control group, one that wasn't injected, and they were as close to being identical as possible. And I mean, they injected things in their eyes, trying to change eye color. And most of those people that survived that did not even know what they had been injected with. They went through life not even knowing what the Germans had put inside them. And there's a whole department in the Nazi army bent on trying to genetically influence. First of all, they want to get rid of Jews because they considered that would be eliminating the entire, what they call the lower echelon segment of society. But they wanted to kill off everybody and repopulate the earth with these blonde-headed, blue-eyed white guys. Anybody read about that? Is this something new to you? You never heard this before, or have you heard it before?
I believe I heard about it in high school, but they when they talk about the Nazi, they just talk about really the Holocaust itself. I mean, not saying that wasn't probably a part of it, but they mainly just focus on the Holocaust and Anne Frank and you know what I'm saying, and all of that. They don't really go into anything else but really the Holocaust, honestly.
Well, what you get in high school is what I call the civic version of history. Uh, it's how great white people won the world and you know and defeated all the enemies but they don't do the good, the bad, the ugly. That's how I teach history usually. Dr.
Yeah.
Mingala, I'm sorry.
No, I'm listening. I say yeah.
Dr. Mingala, that's a name you might have heard. He was the doctor that did all this test, and he literally escaped after the war and lived out his life in Brazil. And they have recently found a compound in Paraguay. Most of the Nazi war criminals, the ones that didn't come to the U.S. to work for Henry Ford and Ford Motor Company, escaped to South America and lived their lives there. Unless the Jews, the Mossad would go and capture, when they found somebody, they would capture them, bring them back to Israel, and try them for war crimes and hang them. But many of them lived out their lives in South America. But they found a compound not too many years ago in Paraguay where they continued these genetic experiments trying to do the master race. And sadly, we aren't even really sure that Adolf Hitler died in the bunker in Berlin, because they burned his body, and the Soviets were the first ones to get to the bunker, and they never shared any information. That would have been 1945. They never shared any evidence of that until 1956. So, you know, Hitler could very well have clones of himself running around. I mean, you see a lot of weird movies about that, but there is a kernel of truth in that that could be possible. But they certainly did carry on those experiments, God knows how long, after the war was over. And so there's always this movement. White supremacists have this kind of a mentality that they want to produce a, you know, master white race or whatever, and you know, they abuse people that are mixed. We're all mixed race. I don't think there's any such thing as pure race, because we've all intermarried or whatever produced, you know. So, but they think that their race is perfect, and they don't have anything to discuss. But anyways, any interest in that at all? I mean, I think that's a interesting study to discuss. Okay, so we do genetically modify plants on a lot, and animals on a lot bigger level. GMO, you see in the grocery store, you will see this non-GMO label. Do you know what that means? Not genetically modified. So, I mean,
that's what no GMO mean.
yeah, I mean, they have modified corn to produce more corn, basically, to overproduce. But it's funny, people that eat tortillas won't eat GMO modified because they said it doesn't have any taste to it. So they basically are making food that doesn't taste at all, that just, you know, for the sake of making food. Animals with hormones. Think about how many chickens are eaten in the United States in a day.
Probably millions.
And then that's just one country. How in the world do you keep enough chickens or cows to supply the hamburger market or the chicken market? I mean, just Chick-fil-A alone. Think about how many chickens they cook in a day. And so they inject these chickens with hormones so that they grow a chicken out now every 90 days. And and my cousin in Georgia used to have 3 chicken houses. He got 90,000 chickens per house. So there'd be 270,000 chickens show up, and 90 days later they'd come pick them up and take them to the market. And they do the same thing with beef and other animals. They inject them with hormones to make them grow faster. What kind of medical effect do you think that has on the human body? I think one of the most interesting things is the rate now at which our young people start sexually maturing. I mean, that used to be 12, 13 years old, and now it can be as young as 8 or 9. And that's one of the effects of the genetic modification of what they're eating. It is also the effect of, you know, when you have pills, they recommend you don't throw them in the trash, that you flush them down the commode or whatever. That gets into the water supply. So if you have, you know, if you're drinking city water, and people, you know, women have, you know, flushed their hormone pills into the water supply, everybody takes it into their body, it begins to affect their maturation rate. Has anybody read about this before?
Yeah, I did. I
Uh,
thought it was off love, but I guess it's true.
oh yeah. I mean, you think about the millions of people and what we do and how we do things, um, and how that affects us long term. We don't like to think of long term benefits, but or long term dangers, but that is certainly one of the issues that we have to think about. And those are all ethical issues. I mean, is it right to super grow a chicken or super grow a cow to make food or make, give us steak or whatever? So those are all parts of this genetically modified and plants. Um, there's several of these legal issues, ethical issues in the book that you ought to take some time to look at because it's well worth thinking about. You will hear this on the news quite a lot. Okay, guys, any closing comments before we shut us down here?
No.
Okay, anybody else? All right, well, it's been my pleasure. And when I get all your grades done, I will send you an email and let you know that they're finished. And wish you much success in what you're doing. And I hope you'll keep in touch and let me know how you end up. And I'll be praying for you and your family and great success. Okay.
Aw,
Thank you so
Right,
much.
thank
Same to
you.
you.
Okay. Y'all take care and have a great day. Okay.
Thank
You
you.
too.
You too.
All right. Bye bye.